SpaceX just filed to buy Cursor for $60 billion. The tool you code with every day is about to become Elon Musk's property. Cursor is the leading AI-powered IDE right now. Built on VS Code, used by millions of developers, and for a lot of indie game devs, it's the center of the entire workflow. And SpaceX, yes, the rocket company, is now also an AI company after merging with xAI last year. They build rockets, they run Starlink, and now they're making a play for the tool you open every morning. If you build games with Cursor every day, this should get your attention. The owner of your core tool is about to change. This isn't abstract. When your IDE changes hands, your workflow changes. Will Cursor stay independent? Will it get folded into Musk's xAI stack? Will pricing shift? Will it start favoring Grok over Claude? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're the exact playbook we've seen every time a dev tool gets acquired. Microsoft bought GitHub for $7.5 billion, and within 2 years we got deeper Azure integration, Copilot, and pricing tiers nobody asked for. SpaceX buying Cursor would make the GitHub deal look like a warm-up act. Here's what we actually know. SpaceX filed its S1 for IPO last week, and buried in the filing was a detail that should stop every AI coder cold. The company has an option to acquire Cursor for $60 billion. Not a typo, $60 billion. For an agentic coding tool that most of you have open right now. SpaceX preempted Cursor's planned $2 billion funding round with this buyout offer. Think about that math. Cursor was about to raise $2 billion at a valuation that would have been a massive headline on its own. SpaceX walked in and said, forget the round, we'll buy the whole thing at a 30 times premium. Why does a rocket company want a code editor? Because SpaceX isn't just a rocket company anymore. They merged with xAI in 2025, and they need AI coding tools across their entire stack. Starlink software, rocket guidance systems, autonomous operations, all of it runs on code, and they want the best AI-assisted pipeline to write that code faster. They're also building their own GPUs with Intel through a chip plant they're calling Terafab, using Intel's 14A manufacturing process. That's a full-stack play. They're not just buying a tool, they're buying the dominant position in AI-assisted development to fuel everything else they're building. The chip plant, the models, the IDE, connect those dots and you see the picture. And the timing tells you everything about where this market is going. The same week this news broke, Google's CEO said 75% of Google's new code is now AI generated. That's up from 50% just last fall. Anthropic writes 70 to 90% of its own code using Claude Code. AI coding isn't a feature add-on anymore, it's the product. And whoever owns the tool that sits between the developer and the model owns the entire pipeline. Here's the number that puts it in perspective. Microsoft bought GitHub for $7.5 billion in 2018. That was the largest acquisition in developer tools history at the time, and it was a huge deal. SpaceX is offering 8 times that for Cursor, 8 times the biggest deal we've ever seen in this space. The market is telling you that AI-powered coding environments are the most valuable real estate in tech right now. Not the models, not the hardware, the environment where developers actually do the work. And think about what makes Cursor worth that kind of money. It's not the editor itself. VS Code is open source. It's not even the AI features. Every IDE is adding those. What Cursor has is distribution. Millions of developers who open it every morning, run their agents through it, and pay for the privilege. That daily habit, that default position in the workflow, that's what SpaceX is buying. They're not paying for code, they're paying for your attention and your daily workflow. That's worth $60 billion in today's market. So what does this mean for you right now? If you're an indie game dev whose morning routine starts with opening Cursor, in the short term, probably nothing changes. Your subscription stays the same. Your key bindings still work. Claude still runs in the background. But look at the trajectory. When Microsoft bought GitHub, the first year was quiet. Nothing changed. The second year brought subtle integration shifts. Azure became the default for new projects. The third year gave us Copilot, changed pricing, and fundamentally reshaped the platform. The pattern is always the same. Year 1 is silence. Year 2 is integration. Year 3 is transformation. When SpaceX takes over Cursor, expect the same pattern, accelerated, tighter integration with Grok and xAI models. Potential preferential treatment for Musk's AI stack over competitors. Possible changes to which third-party models get first-class support and which get second-class. If your workflow depends on Claude running through Cursor, and for a lot of you it does, this is the thing to watch. The risk isn't that Cursor disappears. It won't. The risk is that the tool you chose specifically because it was model agnostic starts tilting toward one ecosystem because the owner also owns that ecosystem. The neutrality that made Cursor attractive in the first place becomes a casualty of the acquisition. Let me walk through what this looks like in practice and what you can actually do about it. Right now, if you're using Cursor for game development, your workflow probably looks something like this. You open Cursor, hit Tab for completions, open the Composer for multi-file changes, and pick your model. Claude for complex reasoning, GPT for speed, maybe Grok for a specific task. That model selector is the key piece of the entire setup. Cursor is model agnostic today. You choose what runs your code. Now imagine that model selector starts changing. Grok moves to the top of the list as the default. Claude gets pushed down or requires an extra toggle to select. Or worse, certain advanced features only work with the in-house model. The Composer gets optimized for Grok's context window. Background agents default to XAI's infrastructure. You can still use Claude, but the experience degrades. The autocomplete feels slower on non-Grok models. The agent context window shrinks. Not because Claude got worse, because the tool is being tuned for a different model. The path of least resistance becomes Grok, and most developers take the path of least resistance. That's the GitHub playbook applied to IDEs. Microsoft didn't kill GitHub support for Google Cloud. They made Azure the default and made everything else slightly harder. Most developers went along because it was easier. Same thing happens here. Let's say you're working on a roguelike project. You've got a dungeon generation system, a combat module, an inventory manager, and a save system. You fire up Cursor's Composer and ask it to refactor the dungeon generation to support procedural room connections. On today's Cursor, the Composer fires up Claude, reasons through the changes, updates 6 files, and the refactor is done in 5 minutes. Clean, fast, model agnostic. Now fast forward to SpaceX-owned Cursor. The same Composer defaults to Grok. Grok's reasoning on complex multi-file refactors isn't as strong as Claude's, at least not today. The refactor takes longer, misses edge cases, introduces a bug in the room connection logic. You switch to Claude manually, but the context window is smaller because Grok gets priority. You're doing more cleanup work than you would have before the acquisition. Your workflow got worse, not because the tool changed, but because the default changed. So what's the backup plan? The most important thing you can do right now is build a model agnostic workflow, one that doesn't depend on a single IDE's integration layer. Here's what that looks like. You run your coding agent through direct API access instead of through Cursor's built-in integration. You use Claude Code in the terminal for heavy lifting, multi-file refactors, complex bug fixes, anything that needs deep reasoning. You keep Cursor or another IDE for editing and navigation, but the agent itself isn't locked to one tool's ecosystem. If Cursor changes hands and the experience shifts, your core workflow is portable. You point your API setup at a different editor and you're back to work the same afternoon. The second thing, get familiar with the alternatives now, not when you're forced to. Windsurf is a strong option with a similar feature set. Claude Code standalone works well for terminal-first workflows. OpenAI's Codex is positioning itself as a direct competitor with background computer use. You don't need to switch today. You need to have spent an afternoon in each of them so that if you need to switch, it's a familiar move, not a panic rebuild under time pressure. The third thing is the hardest but the most important. Don't build your workflow around one tool's proprietary features. If you're using Cursor-specific features that don't exist anywhere else, custom agent behaviors, proprietary context management, specialized completions, those are the pieces that break when the tool changes direction. Build on standards, use APIs, keep your agent prompts portable. The more your workflow depends on one tool's unique features, the more leverage that tool's new owner has over you. There's an irony in all this worth sitting with. Anthropic can't figure out how to price Claude Code at $20 a month because demand is too high. The compute costs exceed the subscription price. The economics literally don't work. Meanwhile, SpaceX is willing to pay $60 billion for the tool that sits on top of that same unprofitable model. The AI coding market is simultaneously too cheap and too expensive, depending on which end of the stack you're standing on. The model maker loses money at $20 a month. The wrapper is valued at $60 billion. Something has to give. And if you want a preview of what Musk taking over a product looks like, look at Twitter. The platform didn't disappear. It changed in ways nobody predicted. Features got renamed, the verification system got gutted and rebuilt, policies shifted weekly, and the entire user experience transformed in months. Cursor users should expect the same energy, not death, transformation. And transformation in your core tool means disruption in your daily workflow, whether you like it or not. This is exactly the kind of shift that breaks workflows overnight. A tool gets acquired, pricing changes, features get redirected toward the new owner's priorities. The indie dev who committed hard to one tool wakes up and their stack doesn't work the way it did yesterday. That's the reality of building with AI in 2026. The ground shifts fast. The tool you chose 6 months ago might have a different owner, a different pricing model, and a different roadmap 6 months from now. This isn't going to slow down. The pace of consolidation in AI tools is accelerating, and every acquisition makes the next one more likely. Inside AI Craft, we track these shifts in real time. When SpaceX files to buy Cursor, we're testing alternatives the same day. When a pricing model changes or an acquisition shifts the landscape, we're running the numbers on what it costs for real game projects, not benchmarks, actual code bases with real complexity. We're not guessing, we're testing, shipping, and sharing what actually works for indie devs who need to keep moving no matter what happens upstream. The devs who thrive in this environment aren't the ones who find the perfect tool and commit forever. They're the ones who build flexible stacks that adapt when the ground shifts. That's the muscle we're building inside the community. Not loyalty to one tool, but the ability to swap tools fast and keep shipping. Everything I just walked you through, the SpaceX deal, what it means for Cursor, the backup workflows, the alternatives, we're building through all of it live inside AI Craft. Whether Cursor stays independent or becomes SpaceX property, whether your model of choice stays first class or gets pushed aside, you need a community that's testing the ground under your feet so you don't have to find out the hard way. Join the community and build with a stack that won't break on you. Find the links in the description below.